Today's episode is brought to you by our distribution partner, Virgil Films and Entertainment. Now, I've worked with Virgil personally, and I can tell you this is a company that champions independent filmmakers. With over 25 years of experience in film distribution and having partnered with brands like National Geographic, OWN, and Major League Baseball, their films, including the mega hot Super Size Me, the Oscar-nominated Restrepo, and the hit documentary Forks Over Knives, have landed on Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, Tubi, Apple TV, and more. They work directly with filmmakers and streaming platforms, and they offer a range of deals to fit different needs. They don't just distribute films, they elevate them. And truthfully, they're just really great people to work with. So if you want to learn more, head on over to virgilfilms.com. And now, on to the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Documentary First. This is Christian Taylor. I am a documentary filmmaker, and this is the podcast where we like to talk about all things documentary filmmaking. And today I'm super happy to have an incredibly talented documentary filmmaker with me today who has a long and distinguished career in this field, over 44 years, actually. And his name is Alan, and he is with us all the way from, where are you, Alan?
I'm currently in Texas.
Texas. He's established himself as an award-winning filmmaker and photographer known for elevating overlooked American stories through films, books, and exhibitions. His upcoming slate is really exceptional. It includes the world premiere of Seeing Progress, The Struggle for Change in Jasper, Texas. And that's one thing we're going to talk about today. New book releases like Maud Stevens Wagner, The Mona Lisa of American Tattoo, and the major exhibition, Everyday Culture, 7 projects of documentary art. Alan is also a 2010 Guggenheim Fellow with more than 20 documentary films, over 40 published works of fiction and nonfiction, and an artistic reach spanning stage works and pivotal archives of African American photography. What makes him stand out is not just the breadth of his work, but his dedication to capturing stories often pushed to the margins. His initiatives like the museum's street culture and documentary arts continue to inspire dialogue and community engagement. He's also connected to a vibrant audience of film and photography enthusiasts, historians, and art professionals, nearly 500 strong across his network. And so here, I think this is a retrospective week at Cinema Village. Is that coming up, or has that already happened?
No, it's coming up November 14th to 20th.
Yes,
and
so that's
this will be the world premiere. The title of the film that you reference, Seeing Progress, the title has evolved as the concept has grown. And the film is now called Quiet Voices in a Noisy World, The Struggle for Change in Jasper, Texas. And the title for this film was one that was generated through my ideas and through the dialogues of the people I was documenting. And ultimately, since it was about them, I wanted them to have a kind of veto power on what the title became. And this current title has great appeal because they are people with quiet voices who are making a huge difference in their world.
Yes. All right, everybody, welcome Alan Govenar. Alan, thank you so much for all the work that you have been doing. Can you talk to me a little bit about your, entree into this field, to this work, and how you started a little bit? Our audience really is interested in how to get going in this business and how to make a career of working in documentary film. So talk to us a little bit about how you got started.
For me, over the years, my work has grown organically. And documentary for me has a multifaceted meaning and meanings. So the arc of my growth begins when I was a teenager. When I was 17, I started writing poetry. When I was 18, I started my first book. At the time, it was a poem, became a story, and finally was published as a novel this last spring.
Wow.
52 years later. And it's a novel called Come Round Right. And it's a novel that's based on true events. It's set in the fictional past of 1970 and the fictional present of 1971. It's a coming of age story.
Well, so never give up on what you've started. Is the moral there.
And so for me, experience is documentary. What we live every day is in some sense documentary. It's filtering our experience into different media. So my first media was poetry, stories, fiction. I later started writing plays. The joy for me is in the making. And I love exploring different media, not just for the sake of the medium, but as a response to what I'm experiencing. And so the choice of medium has always been driven by the subject matter. And while I take great pleasure in inventing stories, I love hearing other people's stories. And so much of my work, whether it be oral histories or works that I do in musical theater, films, photographs, that's what I'm trying to bring forth. So it is this view. In some sense, it's like a kaleidoscope.
And so, how were you able to get to a place where you could make a living off of this, passion and art that you were drawn to and called to?
Well, I did a lot of different things along the way. And initially, I started writing magazine articles and newspaper articles. And as my ambitions and aspirations grew, I needed to find a way to travel. So I started writing travel articles. I also started working in radio.
Okay.
And doing little radio shows. And I pursued a career and with the thought that I was going to become a college professor. So I had been a teacher in university and junior colleges, and I eventually was able to get a PhD in 1984. By then, my first book was published, Stoney Knows How, Life as a Tattoo Artist, and my first film premiered at Film Forum in New York City. It was a film that I made while I was teaching at an art college in Ohio, and I'd received my first NEA grant.
So how did you go from just writing into, okay, I'm just going to make this into a film? That's not often the jump that you make, just from, okay, I'm going to make a film without having the knowledge of how to do that.
Well, I went through, I will say, different film crews because I really didn't know how to do it. When I was getting my master's degree in Austin, 1974, 75, there was a sociology professor who had one of these Sony Portapacks. And, it was portable, but it weighed about 50 pounds. It was in a huge backpack. And I had been writing about tattooing, working on this book about this hunchback dwarf tattoo artist, Stoney Sinclair. And I was in a graduate seminar, and I got talked to this professor, and he let me borrow this equipment. And I took it to San Antonio, and I did my first little movie. In a way, it was like an actuality movie because I didn't move around much. It didn't have much of a tripod and it was a little unwieldy. I made, a little video about Honest Charlie. So I was interested in the form. And then by the time I decided I wanted to make a more complete film, I was teaching part-time at an art college. I was teaching humanities to art students. And the college, because of the nature of the subject matter, was skeptical about being involved. And they agreed to be the fiscal agent for my grant on the condition that they never receive a credit in the final film.
Wow.
So after several missteps in trying to make the movie, I decided I wanted to go the route of maybe someone who I really admire will want to get involved. And that person for me was Les Blank. And I met another filmmaker, Pacho Lane, in Austin, who had worked with Les on his Chulas Fronteras movie. And Les was interested in this. Les became my mentor in filmmaking.
Yes, networking and mentoring, I find whenever I ask filmmakers these questions, it often comes back to that.
And Les not only shot the film, it was edited by Pacho, but Les also lent me the money to finish it. And then he premiered it with two of his movies at Film Forum, 1981. Vincent Canby, reviewing this whole trio of movies, gave an amazing paragraph about this film, Stoney Knows How. In the following spring, it was shown as part of the new director's series at MoMA. And Les continued to be an advocate for the film. And we continued to know each other for the rest of his life. And his son, Harold Blank, now distributes my short films. Les was very special. Les and I also made another short film together called Cigarette Blues. It was just a 6-minute film that was commissioned by the Dallas Museum of Art. And so I was fortunate that I was able to meet someone, and particularly someone I totally admired. When I was in graduate school in Austin, I remembered seeing his films in unconventional places. So Creek Saloon, other places, outdoor screenings, his smell around events. Les was one of a kind. And he was a mentor, a colleague, and a dear friend.
That is an incredible blessing. There is no question about that, for sure. Now, you mentioned this distributor for your short films. What is that company called? Because a lot of people ask me where they can distribute short films, and I don't have a good answer for them.
Well, it's Les Blank Films.
Okay.
And it's run by Harold Blank, but I'm not sure to the extent to which he distributes other films than Les's films. You know, he distributes mine because I worked with Les. I really don't know that much about that. But it's very difficult to get your work into distribution.
Yeah.
And even with the making of that first film, I ended up giving up all ownership of that film for 10 years. 10 years later, I was able to pay back the money to get 50% ownership in this movie and so it was challenging. But flash forward, that film has been in distribution now for 40 years. The book that I did on Stoney was just published in its 40th anniversary edition. It was worth all the effort, for sure.
Yeah, sounds like it. So, and the hopes for your works, when you think about, what you hope people will take away just from all of the things that you've done. You have a huge breadth of works, be it written or visual. Is there a monetary hope for return? Is it a change in culture? What are your main goals for the works that you do?
Well, that's also evolved organically. And so I've made a living doing a number of different things. And so in part, I learned that from Les. I mean, Les, had all kinds of merchandise and posters and T-shirts and mugs. And, he understood his audience. But as he told me, he probably, from a financial standpoint, he did the best when he was doing personal appearances, to some extent. And, I've had broadcast documentaries. And, in 1985, I started a nonprofit called Documentary Arts.
Yeah.
And Documentary Arts was founded to present new perspectives on historical issues, diverse cultures, to broaden public knowledge and appreciation of the arts of different cultures in all media. So Documentary Arts became an umbrella for my work, and I was able to apply for grants. By design, I was never a full-time executive director of Documentary Arts, which continues today. I, like everyone else who works for documentary arts, is a contract employee, and our projects ebb and flow. And I've done projects, multimedia projects. I did two 52-part radio series that back in the day in 91 and 92 were on over 150 stations across the country, and was very much into community radio. So obviously that world has evolved. Now we have the podcast,
Right.
which is in a sense radio, but it's more. And also I think can be less perhaps, but it's something new for me.
Sure.
So it was always very balanced. I didn't want to be in conflict, I didn't want to be in conflict of interest to myself. And so films that I got grants to make through documentary arts are copyrighted to documentary arts. I want to perpetuate this. In many ways, I hope that documentary arts can be a model for a sustainable model of nonprofit management.
Yeah, I was very curious about it because it was actually mentioned in the film that I watched, Quiet Voices. As I recall, there was a woman in there that talked about the photography that was not documented until documentary arts had come along and began doing that. And I didn't understand who that was. And as I then began researching you, I was trying to put two and two together. And then I wondered, were you the first person that had come through there and began documenting their history there?
Well, it was that movie covers 30 years of work.
I noticed that. Is that 30 years of your work?
Primarily, yes. But, it's in the context of, in the intense tragedy that happened in Jasper, Texas, but the earlier history of virulent racial violence in that area, juxtaposed to these people in their 70s and 80s who were volunteers trying to reclaim their own history. I went to Jasper for the first time in 1996. And backing up a bit further, when I started documentary arts in 1985, in part, I had a mission to document the work of African American photographers in Texas. I had gotten a commission in 1984, a year earlier, from the Dallas Museum of Art to do a project called Living Texas Blues that included 3 short films, one of which I did with Les, Cigarette Blues, and a small book and an anthology of cassette. At the same time, there was a 2-volume history of Texas photography being published. I talked to these curators who were from major institutions in the state, and they said that they didn't have any Black photographers in their books because they only had time to look through existing collections, which meant that in 1984, there were no known Black photographers in the existing public collection in Texas. And so I started tracking down Black photographers through business directories, and it became a major project of documentary arts. And our first major touring exhibition was called The Early Years of Rhythm and Blues, the photographs of Benny Joseph. And that toured over 6 years to 29 different venues around the United States and was presented in Europe and France and England. And it really thrust documentary arts forward. And the collection continued to grow. In 1995, after meeting with a committee of people who on the documentary arts board and other professionals, it became clear that there wasn't really an institution that could really handle and process and make accessible these collections, which were endangered, that had been identified and that had been gifted to the nonprofit. My wife, artist Khalida Doolin, and I founded the Texas African American Photography Archive in 1995. And we, over subsequent years, were one of the only independent archives in the United States to be funded by the National Archives in Washington. And so we had 3.5 years funding. And the last phase of it was our archivist, John Slate, working in historically Black colleges. There was a Black history professor at Wiley College, the oldest Black college west of the Mississippi, whose wife was from Jasper, Texas. And she knew of a widow of the local photographer who'd been her photographer, Alonzo Jordan. And a storm, he had died in the East, and a storm had ripped off the roof of his barbershop. He was also a barber. I mean, he's part of the subject of this movie. And I met with her, and she gifted the collections to Documentary Arts. And we have, over the years, we've preserved them. But just this year, we are now giving back these digitized photographs to the community of Jasper.
I think in the movie, I heard it's like over 60,000.
60,000 images in the Texas African American Photography Archive.
I mean,
and so, ultimately, the goal of this collection is to place it in an institution that will make it accessible to the public. This is all about visual literacy.
Yeah. And to be clear, what I learned from your film was his purpose was to capture the African American experience, the African American life. And at that time, particularly in that area, there were no other photographers that were capturing this, African American experience. And so it's very, very rare to have that kind of enormous collection. And he would do the basic things like, school photography and basketball groups and things like that. But I also saw you've put in there just so many other just regular life photographs, and they were really good. He was an excellent photographer.
He was an excellent photographer. I've written extensively about the idea of community photography, not only in terms of content, but in terms of the life of the photographer and his role or her role in the community. So he was an elder in the church. His wife was very active in the church.
Right.
He was a Prince Hall Mason. He was a community person. And he understood the importance of photography as a way of bolstering the self-esteem. Over the years, there were exhibitions that I organized of his work. In 2010, 2011, there was a major exhibition at the International Center of Photography in New York. And there was a book that was published that I did called Jasper, Texas, The Community Photographs of Alonzo Jordan. That year, I also received the Guggenheim Fellowship to continue my work. And so for me, I'm just so grateful to have this long-term association for me with this community. And the most recent filming that we did was Juneteenth this year.
Right. And I did wonder when you started the filming, because I noticed there were a lot of 2009, you'd put in there was some filming from 2009, and now there was filming from 2025.
And there were photographs from 1996.
Yes. So when was the film conceived, and when it clearly was, I think you wrapped it in like June, maybe.
Well, the film was conceived in conjunction with, there's a 40-year survey of the work of documentary arts called Everyday Culture, 7 projects of documentary arts. It's the Center for Photography, Woodstock, that opened September 20th and runs through January 11th, 2026. And I was doing a lot of work related to Jasper. There's also a book that's being published by Aperture called Kinship and Community, selections from the Texas African American Photography Archive, that will be out the end of this year and the beginning of next. So there's a lot of attention. The archive, in part, is the photographs from the archive are also currently in an exhibition on Black photojournalism at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. So there's a lot of interest about this. And when I first went to Jasper and I met with Mrs. Jordan, she was losing her eyesight, and she had her goddaughter, Emma Adams, there, and I was glad because, I was concerned about, I wanted to help, but I also didn't want to intrude. And so having Emma there was great. And so most recently, when we were filming at Juneteenth, Emma was there. But I think it might be her brother in law, George Adams, who's someone I've gotten to know over the last few years. And George and his group volunteers are totally amazing. And when I saw what they were doing, I kept telling people, this is a national story. This is an amazing story of a group of people, African Americans, who come out of this very tough world and place, became successful, going back to the community where many claim ancestry from, the slaves of that period. There's a clear sense of kinship that people feel. And they're doing all these different quiet things. They're putting up roadside markers. They're building memorials to the segregated school. Where the Juneteenth celebration was held was the site of the Beech Grove Elementary School, which was a segregated elementary school in Jasper, which, like many segregated schools, were torn down by the city, and the land was sold to someone who was white. Well, this one African American who had done well came back to Jasper, and he and a few people bought it back for the Black community. And they feel that they're quiet voices. They know they live in a complicated world. And what they're doing on a local level, for me, is a model for America, particularly during these difficult times.
Well, in some sense, so I am so honored in a sense and admire what you're doing. I grew up in the segregated South. I grew up in South Mississippi, and I grew up when schools were segregated. I remember colored and white bathrooms. But then when I was 13, I went to a boarding school in New York where things were very integrated, and I got a very different education and a view of life, and was able to look back at sort of my roots and, have been mourning ever since what happened and what was happening where I grew up. And it has been very difficult for me to figure out, what can I do? And truthfully, what I see you doing is elevating, empowering, shining a light on what the community is doing on their own, which truthfully is the most powerful thing that can happen, for them to take ownership of their history so that nothing can happen to it. It won't be forgotten. No matter what another oppressive community does, they will have that. And that's what I was encouraged about by seeing your film was, you have these, gentlemen who went to this high school that they absolutely loved, and they don't want it to be forgotten. So they built the entrance and the memorial. And, it crushed me to hear that the service members that served in World War II or in Vietnam, names weren't even on the other wall, memorial wall. So they had to build their own wall and put the African-American names that served on that wall. To me, it's just egregious. And so I love what you're doing. I do wonder, how did this become a passion for you? What was it, and when was it did this begin?
Well, I have always grown up in a mixed world. I grew up in the inner city of Boston. I grew up in Dorchester. Living in that, community, which was largely Eastern European, Ukrainian, Russian. It took me years until going to Europe to realize that I was living in a European kind of a neighborhood where people spoke Yiddish on the street. And it was during the 1950s, and there was lots of change happening in that era. There were lots of Blacks moving up from the South. There was lots of racial tension that was brewing in this neighborhood. And during the course of my growing up, there was intense racial violence. And however, for me, I was fortunate. I was blessed to have parents who were socially progressive. And so while I may have felt this undertone of racism among some of my relatives, never with my parents. My father had aspired to be a writer, and he was very active in interfaith work. He was a volunteer, a tireless community volunteer. He was very into helping first time kids who were criminal offenders. He was, very much about that. And he loved jazz music. So the first, I had the first portable record player we had, Dizzy Gillespie, Sarah Vaughan, Charlie Parker. That was the sound I grew up with. So, I've written a number of books about blues and jazz over the years, but it also affected my attitude toward wanting to know the other. And how do we get to know people and who are different from us and have a meaningful dialogue? Because I saw how terrible things became in the neighborhood where I grew up. It was unconscionable acts of violence on both sides, all sides. Yeah. And a lot of my work has explored that. There's a musical that I wrote called Texas in Paris, which is based on a concert that I had organized in Paris, France in 1989. And it's essentially as a musical, which became an off-Broadway show that starred the Tony Award winner Lillias White, and then we did it in Paris, is basically about two elderly people. One, an old Black woman from the South who sings a cappella spirituals, never been on an airplane before, and this other person who's about her age, a white cowboy who has a little ranch in West Texas. These were the real people I brought in '89, but then played by actors years later. And it's basically, I wrote it after Ferguson. And it was basically about people, the racism that exists among people who live in isolation of one another. And so these two elderly people who are very polite to each other, yes, Miss Mays, yes, Mr. John, they perform on stage together, but they can't really understand what the French people are saying, even when they speak English. And so they're forced to have a dialogue. And they end up talking about race, which is something they never, ever thought they probably would ever talk about. And they bump heads and they realize the preconceptions that they've had of each other. And they finally, in the end, come together. But that's the messaging of much of my work. I have a new musical now called Stomping at the Savoy. It's based on a children's book of mine. The other musical, Texas in Paris, The Old Black Woman, is the subject of a children's book that I did called Osceola, Memories of a Sharecropper's Daughter. Osceola was also the subject of a movie. So often people I meet appear in different forms of expression because I know them for so many years. So my current musical, which is called Stompin' at the Savoy, is based on another children's book of mine called Stompin' at the Savoy, The Story of Norma Miller. And it's about Norma Miller, who was one of the first generation of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers at the Savoy Ballroom. And the book is about this girl coming of age. And the musical focuses on Norma at age 16 and 3 months of her life. The book for the musical has been written by me and Phaedra Michelle Scott, a young African-American playwright who really has helped bring this to a bigger presence. But it had its world premiere in April, May at Delaware Theater Company, and we're hoping to do it in New York next year.
Wow. So, congratulations. That's just incredible.
But once again, the story relates to aspects of history that a lot of people, perhaps for whatever reason, aren't aware of. So Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, the hallmark of the Savoy was that it was the only dance hall in New York City and maybe the nation, where blacks, whites, and anybody could dance together on the dance floor.
I didn't know that.
And so it's an important message.
Yeah.
But it's also the message of, it's the love of the art, the love of the dance. It's the girl becoming a young woman and actualizing her dream.
That sounds beautiful. I'd love to see that. I want to get back to the film that we're talking about. And one of the things that stuck with me so prominently, talking about things that a lot of people do not know. One of the things that put Jasper, Texas on the map was a particularly gruesome murder of a young black man, James Byrd. Is that his name? James Byrd?
James Byrd Jr., 1998.
Right. And he was just randomly picked up by 3 white guys and chained to the back of a truck and driven through the woods until he was decapitated and killed and left by a cemetery, correct? Am I right?
Yes.
And it put Jasper on the map as that's Jasper. And I think, now Jasper's trying to demonstrate that it is more than that, but it does have a big stamp on the town. One of the things that stuck with me is you have I'm not sure what his role is, you'll have to remind me, but he seems like a historian, or you use him in that role. He talks about a photograph that was sent to him of 4 young black men who were being hung. And it was the real photograph, but it was also a photograph that was put
5 African-American men.
5
African-American men in a dogwood tree.
And there's a poem.
There's a poem associated with this.
And I'd like to read it. It's called The Dogwood Tree. This is only the branch of a dogwood tree, an emblem of white supremacy, a lesson once taught in the pioneer school that this is a land of white man's rule. The red man once in an early day was told by the whites to mend his way. The Negro now, by eternal grace, must learn to stay in the Negro's place. In the sunny South, the land of the free, let the white supreme forever be. Let this a warning to all Negroes be, or they'll surely suffer the fate of the dogwood tree. And this was what year?
This was in 1907. And what's remarkable about this postcard coming to light, I mean, it's published in my book, Jasper, Texas, that was published in 2011 for the first time. But in the film, it sets the context of this history of virulent racial violence. And the person who tells the story of receiving the card, Bob Ray Sanders, is a pioneering African-American journalist in Dallas and Fort Worth. He was started as an NPR reporter. He had his own news show on PBS. And at that time that he received this card, he was a columnist for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And there was an elderly white woman who called him and said that she had found this card in her belongings, the mother's belongings. And she remembered that her mother had given it to her as a child. And she was horrified, clearly. This realization that clearly, I don't know anything about her. I don't think Bob Ray knows anything about her. But she did the responsible thing. She felt compelled to bring this to a Black journalist because it needed to be made public. That is the context out of which James Byrd's lynching happens many years later.
Right.
So it makes the movie in the end is hopeful because it's about this amazing resilience of the people who live there, who are really spearheading something very important in terms of their dignity, the dignity of their community. And they really want to move Jasper to a point where meaningful social change can occur. And in the movie, you see that this is happening. Given all this context, the the county museum in the center of Jasper now has an exhibition about the killing of James Byrd. They have a section on photographs from my book about Lorenzo Jordan. They have another section on freedom colonies. So it's a step forward. And not only are they doing this related to social and historical awareness, they started a scholarship fund. They've given $1,000 or more to Black kids from this area to go to college.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing. I agree with you. I mean, even the mother of James Byrd, who you interviewed, she's such a strong figure.
She's incredible. And the way the family created this foundation for racial healing.
Yeah. You see her strength. I mean, she talks about how the headstone or the grave of her son was defaced 3 times after his death.
Yeah.
And ultimately they had to put a gate or a fence just around his grave. But she's not feeling sorry for herself or just demoralized. She's strong and realizing that this cannot defeat us. We must continue to work for reconciliation.
Exactly. And that point of view is echoed 15 years later. And the other person who recounts what happened on that night and his telling of the story is chilling. But at the same time, where he ends up is that his commitment to going forward. These are people who have endured a lot and unconscionable trauma.
Yeah.
And they are very forward thinking.
Let me ask you a little bit about the way you made the film. So your movie, you made a conscious decision, obviously, not to have it narrated at all. The people themselves told the story. It's just you interviewed them and you wove it together with their interviews. There's really no talking heads. Talk to me about those decisions and why you chose to make the film the way you did.
Well, my principal collaborator in making the movie is my editor, Jason Johnson Spinos. And Jason and I have worked on several features together. Plus, Jason's edited many of my short films. Interesting enough, Jason was born the year I started documentary arts. But we have an active and fluid dialogue. So in a sense, we're writing the film together. And I think we feel that way because it's a sequencing. And Jason is immensely talented that way. And this film has many different layers to it. And to weave them together, to not lose its emotive power. Because while I've made television documentaries, and maybe this gets shown on television, but I'm not sure, it's not a conventional documentary.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I was wondering what your hope was going to be for this film, because I was struggling to see where this would fit in, or because for me it's so focused on Jasper and the experience of Jasper. I can see it being for Jasper, and in a historical society or like a historical museum or something like that. What is your hope for, or where do you see it fitting in?
Well, for me, it comes at a very important time. And I mean, for me, the film, I'm hoping will have some indie theater life, which many of my movies have over the years. And so it's a movie that is about what we're living through right now. And it takes a very proactive view on what's possible. So what I would like is to see people watch the movie and to come away feeling hope. And that's, I think, a very important message in today's world. So as time has gone on in the making of movies and with documentary arts, I make very low budget movies, relatively speaking. I mean, a lot of this was shot with my iPhone. And, I did have a cameraman who I've worked with in France. He came for Juneteenth. But other than that, and then there's another local cameraman that I've worked with for many years. But my last 3 features have been largely shot with my iPhone. And it works well for me. And it's a way it's not too intrusive. The pictorial quality is great. It can't do smartphone cinema, if done well, understands the limitations of what it is. You can only go so far with it. So I make it, it's interesting. I think a lot about these days about the actuality movies of Lumiere and Edison, because I'm constantly shooting little 10, 15-second. And then sometimes, if it becomes an interview or a conversation, but it becomes more conversation. So for me, at this point in my life, I love I've made higher budget documentaries, but I love making lower budget documentaries that we'll see. I'm hoping it becomes, an indie favorite. I have no idea. And I don't really think about that other than I know there are people who will enjoy watching it or want to watch it. So for me, I'm in it for the long term. It's like my first film on Stoney. It's 40 some years later, 44 years later, and it's still in distribution. People still want it. And ironically, people still want it as a DVD.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm finding my film, it does appeal to older generations and they do still have DVDs. So I am selling a lot of
What's
DVDs.
your movie?
Yeah. Huh?
What's your film?
So my film is called The Girl Who Wore Freedom. It's the story of D-Day, but from the perspective of the French. And so it's a very different take about, a D-Day and what they lived through on that day.
Sounds good. I've worked a lot in France.
Yeah, you might be really interested in this film.
I am, because my next feature is about Anne Morgan, who was the youngest daughter of J.P. Morgan. But she's not as well known in this country. But she was the World War I era.
Yes.
She was a major humanitarian, and I've done a book about her, and it's hard to make a movie about her. And so once you get into those realms of history, because we live in a world that doesn't pay a lot of attention to history. So how does that work? For me, a breakthrough in this movie is the music. I mean, let's
talk about that.
When I discovered that John Lomax had done these recordings in Jasper, the music is what we're talking about sounds like a really serious movie, but the counterpoint of this music to what you're seeing and the way we're using cataloging cards. And then, the music just takes it to another realm.
That was my favorite part. And just to give a little bit of, explanation about that, John Lomax, and, he was a white man. He was a white man that decided, what years did he go back there?
Well, there's a long story there about John Lomax. He had been a banker. He loved black music because he grew up around it. And, when he was a kid, but then the stock market crash came. He's a major figure. A lot to discuss about John Lomax.
Where was he born, or where did he grow up?
He was from Texas.
Texas. Okay.
And he did these recordings. He
traveled around to find
and his son, music. Alan Lomax, is more well known than him. But in any case, John Lomax made these recordings in East Texas, which mirror the life and places that the movie's about. So it just became, that's what really, when I discovered this songbook, because a lot of my musicals and other things that I do, this is a songbook that is largely unknown.
Yeah.
It's just such a remarkable array of music, and it carries you through. And so it creates what I want in these movies. What makes them art for me is when you create this kind of tension between fact and feeling, that I want people to feel something. This is not an information movie in a conventional sense. I mean, you learn about this, but you're carried in different places because the music runs longer, so that it affects you that way.
Well, and what I loved was you were able to find descendants of the slaves that sang the music that was in the Library of Congress, and the photograph of those people that sang the song. I mean, that to me just was a beautiful marriage of.
Great! I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, I mean,
for me, that's what really makes it into.
That was genius. That and the fact that John Lomax, I mean, I just couldn't believe that how amazing it was that he would go around and record those lost songs that no one would ever know existed. Just what brilliance to do that. And, I loved that you exposed those. I would have never known they existed. Now I want to know more. I want to hear more. I think my question about that, I went back in one of my films. There's a French woman who made a relationship with a GI who sang a song, "Oh Mexico Way" from 1939, which I thought was nothing, and ended up having to pay money to have this song in my film. Did you have to pay anything for these, or was it all fair use because it was in the Library of Congress?
These are the Library of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're available. They were intended to be such.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very interested in obscure songbooks. My musical Stomp of the Savoy has some musical surprises in it. My movie Down in Dallastown about the 8th anniversary of the assassination of JFK is full of music, and a lot of and my musical Texas in Paris that I've been talking about, there's not a single song in that show that was composed or published later than 1905.
Wow.
So I like going into sheet music, and I like finding recordings like this because they are so emotive.
Yeah,
I'm so delighted we're talking about that, because I feel like it's all been very serious, and there's something about this music that's playful.
I know.
And that's what creates that emotional energy.
It's amazing to me. It had to be that they needed that kind of lift in their life.
Well, the people who recorded knew nothing about recording. Maybe they'd heard the radio. Those recordings were people just.
But they had the songs prior. These were songs you knew.
Oh, right. They were heir to these musical traditions. Yes.
Right. They had been singing them in the fields when they were working. They had made these songs. Yeah. I'm sure of it. And I think it was to keep them going, and
truly
to entertain themselves and their families in the evening. And you can hear that this is, and music to the Black community is the life. It brings them life. I mean, I've worshiped in their churches, and I've become so close to that community, and I've seen how important music is to them.
Where are you based?
Right now I'm in Chicago, but I've spent so much time in South Mississippi. Yeah, that's where all my family is.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I could just hear the joy in their voices as they sang those songs. I'm sure they were delighted to be recorded.
They were. There is that joy, and it drives home further this whole message of what these people are doing in today's world. It's like they're doing it because they believe in it.
Yeah.
And that's,
And these people were happy to show you everything that they did, every building, every museum, they were all wearing their T-shirts.
It's an ongoing relationship. I mean, there's still it's when I was making the movie, there were times it was some of this group, and I would joke with them, I'm 73, but George is 86. And it was the oldest film crew that I'd ever had. These wonderful people, and we have a good, it's an ongoing dialogue.
Yeah.
So this has really been terrific. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I think we could talk for hours.
Yes.
But please let me know when you're going to edit this in some shape or form.
Not really. We put it all out there just like it is. So the last question I have for you before I let you go is I always ask my filmmakers, is there anything that I haven't asked you or that people haven't asked you that that you really would love to share?
I'm sure there are other things, but I've enjoyed sharing what I have today, and let's make the most of the moment.
Yeah.
Let's hope for a better world.
Is there any way, I mean, you have been such a prolific artist and you have so much out there. If people are interested in finding any of the things that you've talked about, how can they find more of your work?
Well, the best place to go is documentaryarts.org. There's also an online magazine that we do called truthinphotography.org. And then the film, Quiet Voices in a Noisy World, has a website that is quietvoicesinanoisyworld.org. And the film is going to premiere at Cinema Village in New York City, November 14th, alongside a retrospective of 12 of my other movies.
Wow.
14th and the 20th. But there'll be several screenings of Quiet Voices. So I'm hoping your listenership will want to come see the movie. And if not, I'm sure it will be available online at some point in the future.
Well, I will say we have listeners in New York, absolutely. And I will tell you, my favorite distributor of all listens to this podcast. He's actually a sponsor of this podcast. It's Virgil Films. They distribute my film, The Girl Who Wore Freedom.
That's great.
They are a phenomenal distributor. And I recommend you reaching out to them for sure and giving them a shot and making sure that you talk with them. I recommend everyone does. So, it's been a delight.
Great. I have a wonderful distributor too for my features, first run features in New York. And so that's great. And I really appreciate being on your show today.
Yeah, thank you. The last thing, we have this segment called DocuView Deja Vu. And we always ask people, do you have a documentary film that you would like to recommend our viewers watch?
Well, for me, it's not a new film, but I think a must-see is Night and Fog.
Night and Fog. Who is that by?
Alan Renee.
And how did we find it?
Let me check and tell you. I'll just look real quickly. I think it's on Amazon Prime, but it's on a lot of different.
Well, you guys can look on
channels.
You can look on Just Watch. Just Watch is an app.
There we go. You know more than I do, but it's a 1956 film. It was controversial when it's made.
Okay.
Basically, I think if you watch that movie, which is basically a Holocaust survivor taking you through a death camp without what's the vestiges, the remains of a death camp. But the monologue that he delivers is so powerful. And in some sense, it's had a great impact on me as a filmmaker because it showed the power of the interplay between words and pictures. And it's a very important movie, particularly as we're living in a time where we must fight the politics of erasure.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that recommendation tremendously. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your breadth of your career and sharing that with us.
Well, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you.
All right. Take care. We're going to stop recording, but please do not close your computer. So we don't want to lose what's happening now. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody. Hey, everybody. This podcast is brought to you by Documentary First Productions, and we need your support so that we can keep preserving history. If you could go over and grab some merch or watch our films at documentaryfirst.com, you'll help us keep making awesome documentaries and sharing the stories that matter, and also bring amazing filmmakers and their wonderful films to the world. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you for visiting documentaryfirst.com. Follow Documentary First on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. This podcast was produced by Documentary First, edited and mixed by Jason Hoban, with music by Jeff Kurtenacker.